Hi everyone, my name is John and today I'll be going through the tips for each component of the New South Wales Selective exam in 2022. This is for students currently in Year 6 looking to gain entry in 2023 next year in high school in a partially or selective high school. It will not be everything you need to keep in mind, but I will be going through 2 to 3 of the more important tips and reminders that we want students to remember to prepare for in this upcoming exam. If you are already a student learning from us, you would have already received a more detailed version as well as additional tips, but I think these tips today that I'll be sharing will still be good for those who are not with us and just need that extra push. So nevertheless, what I will go through will be relevant for people who are already prepared for the exam or people who are feeling extremely worried about certain sections. Let's get into it. Let's start with reading comprehension. There are 4 key components in this exam, namely the standard reading comprehension, poetry, closed passage, and extracts. Number 1, you want to read the text first. The first tip is to read the text first because the reading order is so important. I really do not like how tutors and teachers say to go to the questions first and then go to the text. In my opinion, this is not effective at all. By reading the text first, you'll get the gist of what is actually being asked, and it will save you time when you read the question and you want to double check. When you start with the question first, you are trying to look for a keyword, but what happens when they don't have the exact keyword? You're going to be wasting a lot of time, and it's not practical. The second tip that I like to share is to annotate. This is going to be quite unique to this year in particular, as it is still going to be done on paper. Annotation is another word for making comments and underlining certain words. This is really useful because it will allow you to focus on certain words and phrases and ultimately allow you to answer the question more easily. Although keep in mind, lots of students who aren't really used to annotating, they just underline every single word in the question or the text. Not every word is going to be important. You need to identify what is the more important words and just underline it or annotate accordingly. The third tip for reading comprehension is to really manage your time. In the reading exam, if you don't manage your time properly, it's going to be a major issue. Keep an eye on the clock, and if you know you only have a few minutes left and you have maybe 2 sections to go, then you can maybe be strategic with it. For example, if you have the closed passage section and the extract section to go, what I would personally recommend is to do the extract section if you only have a couple minutes. For starters, the extract section is arguably the more easier section compared to the rest of the actual exam, and it's worth more in terms of the marks as there's more questions assigned to it compared to the closed passage, which is often quite tricky, and even if you get them all correct, it will only get you up to 6 marks. In mathematical reasoning, we know the types of questions they can ask. The way that they word questions are substantially different to what you typically learn in a textbook or in school compared to the NAPLAN or anything like that. It is worded math questions with multiple steps, which is why I would like to share 3 specific tips for this exam. Number 1, you have to understand the question properly. This is a tip that is important for not just the mathematical reasoning section, but for every component of the selective exam. So you want to analyze the question and make sure you know what the question is asking. Carefully examine the diagram, including the graphical data. So this means the X and Y axis, if they give you a graph, and try to remove information that is not needed to answer the question. Tip number 2, write your steps down. As these math questions usually take multiple steps, you want to write down your approach and method in answering these questions. Write down steps 1, 2, 3, and even step 4 if needed. You can write it down next to each question, and the fortunate thing here is that each question has a decent amount of space around it. This allows you to go back if you have extra time at the end of the test to double check your working out and quickly identify if you've made an error or if you need to correct a answer. If you did not write any working out or any of your steps out, you can't really check your thought process again at the end of the test. You essentially have to answer the whole question. And sometimes at the end of the exam and you have to come back, you don't have that much time to go through these questions again. You might only have a minute or 2, so you want to make sure that you write your steps down. The third and final tip for mathematical reasoning is to be calm. Yes, the selective exam is an important exam and there are so many different sections and topics that can be assessed. In math, try to stick with the fundamentals and what you are used to. If you have never seen that type of question before, maybe you didn't practice it, or maybe it's worded in a completely different way and you don't really understand what is being asked, that's okay. You want to make sure you relax and solve it just like any other question. Stressing does not help anyone, especially not in mathematical reasoning. So make sure you stay calm even when you don't know how to answer the question. Next, let's get into thinking skills. In terms of thinking skills, this is the newest component of the selective exam, and there are so many different moving parts. For starters, we know that there are problem-solving questions that resemble math-style questions. We also know there are statement questions that pose an assumption which may involve strengthening or weakening an argument. The first tip for thinking skills is to really understand the question, which is critical. Make sure to go over the key elements of the question so you know what is being asked. Look at the keywords and try to find out the root of what is being assessed. There are going to be variables that are likely not going to be necessary, and you don't need general knowledge to answer these questions. I remember talking to a parent last year, and they thought some of the practice questions we gave them on thinking skills was too hard for students. They said students in primary school should not know chemistry, so why is a question on it? That's a very fair point if it was true. When I had a look at the question, only the topic of the question was on chemistry, but you did not actually need to know anything specific about chemistry outside of the question to answer it. So don't be like that parent and overthink things. The thinking skills questions have all the information you need already in the question, and it's already provided. The second tip is to really check your answer. As we are all humans, we are not perfect. That is why we should always check your answer if it came from a statement and see whether we can substitute it back into the question. If you can, that is a great sign that is most likely correct. If it doesn't match the logic or the question, it is a sign that is most likely incorrect. The third tip for thinking skills is to move efficiently. You only get 1 minute per question in this exam. So you cannot dawdle or spend too much time on a question, as it will reduce the amount of time that you have on other questions. That is why you have to move quickly and make sure you monitor your pacing. If you're having a lot of difficulty on a certain question and you've already spent a minute or two, it may be a good idea to just have a guess and move on. Mark the question with a star or a symbol so you can come back to it if you have time and move on. It is much better to answer more questions correct than to only get the first couple of questions all correct and not have the chance to answer any of the questions in the latter half of the exam. Be strategic with it and spend your time wisely. This leads into the last component of the test, which is writing. The writing component is multiple times more difficult and complex compared to the old selective writing test. We know that it's going to be more complex, that it's beyond just assessing narratives or persuasives, which made it a lot easier for students to prepare for. We can see this from last year, where the question was a newspaper report and the sample paper that they provided was an advice sheet. Two text types that are quite unique and that normal students that are not going for selective have very little exposure to. But let's get into the tips for the writing. For writing, you first need to plan. It doesn't matter how smart you are, everyone needs to plan. The objective of a plan is to make sure your writing is logical and follows a clear structure. Writing that does not have a plan rarely performs as well compared to students who plan beforehand because of that very reason. Remember that it does not have to be super detailed. It is just a plan, an outline, a guide for you. This can be 3 words on each of the arguments if you plan on writing a persuasive, or it could be you following the log structure if it was a narrative. The second tip is to know the text type, because depending on the text type, it will require different approaches from the writing. What is required for a letter will be so much different compared to what is required for a narrative. Know the differences before you start writing, and during and near the end of your writing, make sure to include those specific elements. And the last tip that I like to share for writing is to finish it. Even if you are in the juicy body paragraphs in your writing, make sure to finish the actual writing task. A one-sentence conclusion is much better than a body paragraph with a bit more detail, but you left out the conclusion completely. Have a watchful eye on the time, and if you are in the final 2 to 3 minutes, you just have to start your conclusion immediately if you have not already done so. It is not surprising to say that the selective exam is an important exam. There are so many different and important points to remember, but I hope the 3 points that I shared in each component of the exam is useful for those doing this exam in just about a week's time in March. It is not every point that you have to consider, but they are going to be great reminders and a guide for the students. I wish you all the best, and I know that the last tips video that I made for 2021 was extremely popular and useful for students. Make sure to write down in the comments below if you have another tip you want to share with others, or if you just want to wish each other good luck. I hope that you guys get into the school that you guys wanted, but even if you don't make it in, there's always a chance of trying to transfer into another selective high school in years 7 to 10. It is a harder approach, and it's a completely different exam, so work hard this time around, and if you make it in, it will save you trouble later on. There's not long to go now, but I hope the hard work really pays off. If you like this video, definitely like it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.